Our first story tonight takes us back to the darkest days of the 14th century, when silence, not medicine, was the key to survival. This is the story of a nun who outlived the Black Death by doing almost nothing at all. Tonight, we begin not with action, but with stillness. A hush so complete it settles into the bones. The year is 1349, and the world is unravelling, not with a bang, but with a whisper that spreads from town to town, carried by breath, by touch, by the simple act of being near. This is the year the Black Death blankets Europe. Florence shuts its gates. London buries its clergy. Villages disappear, not over generations, but overnight. There are no headlines, no hospitals, no hope, just the rattle of carts carrying the dead and the flicker of candles trying to hold back the dark. Amid this chaos, we meet someone utterly unremarkable by the standards of her time. Sister Agnes. She does not lead, she does not preach, she is not remembered for visions or miracles or martyrdom, but she lived. She lived when millions did not, and her survival tells us something quiet and important. Agnes lived in a Carthusian convent, a small stone compound built on a rise of land far from the nearest village. The Carthusians were a silent order, devoted to prayer, routine, and deliberate withdrawal from the noise of the world. And in 1349 that withdrawal turned out to be a shield stronger than any armour. Let us step inside those walls. A bell rings. Softly. Morning prayers begin in silence. No one speaks. Each nun, including Agnes, kneels on the cold stone floor in her cell, whispering psalms to the grey light of dawn. Outside, the herb garden waits. Mint, yarrow, and wormwood. These are not luxury plants. They are medicine, or at least what passed for it in the Middle Ages. Agnes tends this garden after prayer, her hands in the earth, her thoughts still. The sky above her is heavy with late spring clouds. A soft breeze rustles the linen drying on lines between cloisters. She doesn't know what's happening beyond the hills, not yet. News, if it comes at all, comes slowly. A traveller mentions bad air in the city. A merchant, unusually pale, warns of ships turning back, towns shuttering. Then one day, the priest who visits them weekly to deliver communion simply stops coming. At first, no one panics. This is a life designed for solitude. But then the baker's boy, the one who leaves bread at the gate, also disappears. The abbess calls the sisters together. No speeches, no predictions, just one decision. The gate stays shut. The convent, once semi-open to the neighbouring village, closes itself entirely. No deliveries, no visits, no contact. The silence deepens. Agnes returns to her copying. Her desk is worn smooth by years of elbows and ink pots. She uses a quill sharpened to a needle's point and writes Latin script with a hand so steady, so clean, that it would make a modern calligrapher pause in admiration. She copies not just scripture, but psalters, liturgical guides, herbal texts. In the margins she adds drawings, birds mostly. Perhaps they remind her of freedom, or God, or maybe she just likes birds. Weeks pass. In the village below, smoke rises too often. Doors hang open, no children's voices reach the hill. Inside the convent, Agnes boils linens. She steams herbs in a clay pot over the hearth, filling the air with lavender and mint, She writes, she prays, she feeds the goose, who has taken to following her around like a grumpy shadow. One sister falls ill, they isolate her, burn her bedding, use every herb they know, and somehow she recovers. It is noted in Agnes's small private ledger, Elena, healed, followed 2 days later by Elena returns to bread. There is no drama in the phrasing, no divine intervention, just bread. More time passes. The convent runs low on wheat, the root cellar thins, the water barrel collects too slowly, and yet they endure. Agnes switches from fresh ink to oak gall. She sharpens old quills into new ones. She writes with more spacing between lines, conserving parchment. These are the details of survival. Not heroic, not noble, just practical. She spends entire afternoons in the garden, coaxing life from thin soil, chamomile, sage, garlic. Plants with names and uses passed down from sister to sister. At night the nuns sit together, still not speaking, and stitch linen strips for bandages, just in case. They do not know what the plague is, only that it strikes fast, and those who care too closely often die. But the Carthusians, by design, do not touch often. Meals are eaten apart, cells are separate. Conversation is rare. They were made for this, though they never meant to be. Agnes's thoughts shift as the year wanes. She adds tiny prayers in the corners of her pages. Domine, dona nobis pacem. Lord, grant us peace. Sometimes she writes names, old sisters long gone, remembered only by the books they once held. The ink dries, the goose honks, life goes on. Eventually a season turns, the wind changes, the sky lifts, distant birds return, and one morning a knock at the gate. It is cautious, almost apologetic. The abbess listens, then opens it. A man stands there, unshaven, sunburned, holding a wide-brimmed hat in his hand. He says the village needs help. There are only 9 people left. The rest are gone. He says the convent's bell was the only sound they heard during the plague. It rang faintly once each evening, a habit the sisters kept without realizing its reach. To him, it meant hope. To Agnes, it was just time for vespers. The convent opens slowly, carefully. They give bread, water, herbs, a place to rest, but still they do not touch. Agnes watches it all. She writes less now. She listens more. Her notes become reflections. She does not claim wisdom. She does not credit prayer alone. She writes simply, stillness may be strength. We don't know what became of her. There's no statue, no grave with a date, no church named in her honour. But we have her pages, and that is enough. In the margin of one, dated with a fading sun symbol, she draws a bird with outstretched wings, and a convent gate, quietly closed. She did not conquer the plague. She did not fight it. She outlasted it, through silence, through care, through simplicity. And perhaps that's a kind of victory too. Now we turn to a different kind of silence, not born of fear, but of precision. In this next story, we meet the man who quietly built one of the most powerful empires in history, and did it without ever raising his voice. There are loud legacies, and there are quiet ones. Some men carve their names into stone, shout from balconies, and fill the newspapers with smoke and noise. And then there was John Davison Rockefeller, born in 1839 to a father who sold snake oil and a mother who prayed for patience. Rockefeller would become the wealthiest man in modern history, not by spectacle, but by structure, not by shouting, but by organizing. Let's go back to the small town of Richford, New York, a cold rural corner with wood smoke in the air and dirt roads lined with frost. John was the second of 6 children. His mother Eliza was a devout Baptist, methodical, reserved. She taught her children to work hard, tithe often, and never waste. Even as a child, John tracked every penny in a leather-bound notebook. He called it his ledger of receipts and expenditures at age 11. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, known as Big Bill, was by contrast a man of shadows, a travelling salesman, a self-styled doctor, a trickster. He'd vanish for weeks, then return with stories and a full purse, sometimes generous, sometimes cruel. From his mother, John learned thrift. From his father, perhaps, how the world worked. At 16, he landed his first job as an assistant bookkeeper. The job paid 50 cents a day, and young John walked there each morning in a plain suit carrying a lunch pail packed with bread and an apple. He was quiet, diligent, precise. Co-workers joked that Rockefeller never smiled. He would later say, "I was trained to work, to save and to give." And give he did, to the church, to his siblings, to himself most of all, in the form of steady investment. In the post-Civil War years, America was roaring forward. Railroads, steel, steamships, and oil. Not the kind you fry with, the kind you burn. Whale oil was growing scarce, candles too dim, but crude oil, thick, black, pulled from the earth in Pennsylvania, offered something new, illumination. But crude oil in its raw form was messy, volatile, useless unless refined. This is where Rockefeller saw his opportunity. He didn't gamble on digging, he built a refinery. In 1863, at just 24 years old, he and a few partners opened one in Cleveland, Ohio, quietly, efficiently. Others rushed into the oil boom with wild speculation, striking deals in saloons and shouting about fortunes in the making. But Rockefeller focused on the margins. He reduced waste, bought in bulk, secured transport at lower rates. He made refining boring, predictable, profitable. By 1870, he founded Standard Oil. The name was deliberate, plain, solid, unassuming. But behind that name was a growing force. Rockefeller didn't want to be part of the market. He wanted to be the market. He believed that chaos was waste. Competition, in his view, created inefficiency, duplication, and instability. So he began to buy out his competitors, one at a time, often through intermediaries, quiet negotiations, a letter here, a deal there, Some sold willingly, others less so. He'd offer a fair price, but also a warning. If you didn't sell, he would simply undercut you, outlast you, absorb your suppliers, block your distribution. Most sold. By the 1880s, Standard Oil controlled about 90% of oil refining in the United States. It was not just a company, it was a machine. It negotiated secret rates with railroads, developed pipelines, created subsidiaries. To the public, Rockefeller remained a mystery. He avoided interviews, rarely appeared in public, worked behind a modest desk in a modest office. He lived in a plain house, attended church, played with his children. He tracked every dollar spent in a personal ledger, even into his 80s. He collected pennies, literally. To outsiders, he was a contradiction. Ruthless in business, generous in charity, unsmiling, but capable of immense tenderness toward his grandchildren. He walked to work, wrote thank you notes, avoided alcohol and unnecessary attention, and yet his empire reached into every home. If you lit a lamp in 1885, chances are it burned Rockefeller's oil. But the tide turned. In the early 1900s, investigative journalists, most famously Ida Tarbell, exposed Standard Oil's tactics. Tarbell's father had been run out of the oil business by Rockefeller's practices. She spent years documenting his methods, secret deals, aggressive buyouts, price wars. Her reporting fueled public outrage. In 1911, the Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil must be dismantled under antitrust law. The trust was split into 34 companies: Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, and others. But here's the part that confounded his critics. Rockefeller owned shares in all of them. When the trust split, his fortune doubled. He retired quietly, played golf, walked his estate, read the Bible, and gave away money, a lot of it. He created the Rockefeller Foundation, funded universities, public health, medical research. He financed the eradication of hookworm in the American South, paid for the first school of public health at Johns Hopkins, backed research that led to the discovery of penicillin. He believed in scientific philanthropy, not just giving, but solving. And yet critics still questioned his motives. Was it guilt, reputation laundering, or simply another system, another structure built to last? Rockefeller lived to 97. He watched the 20th century arrive from a front row seat, watched his empire morph into institutions, watched as others tried to replicate his formula and often failed. When asked for the secret to his success, he said, singleness of purpose. But maybe it was something simpler. Maybe it was his patience, his refusal to be rushed, his belief that systems could be built like clocks, precise, hidden behind the face, quietly turning the world. He didn't conquer the market with charisma. He did it with margins, with ledgers, with silence. While others made noise, he made structure, and structure endures. From the boardroom to the Badlands, our next story shifts west to a desert town that once pulsed with copper, fire and noise, and now echoes with ghosts and artists. This is the story of Jerome, Arizona. If you find yourself driving through the high desert of central Arizona, somewhere between the red rocks of Sedona and the broad shoulders of Prescott, you might catch a glimpse of something clinging to the cliffs above. Crooked buildings, weathered brick, an old hotel with too many windows. That's Jerome. Built into the side of Cleopatra Hill, the town doesn't so much sit on the landscape as hang off it, like it's trying not to fall, which, on more than one occasion, it nearly has. But long before Jerome was a town, it was a whisper, a rumour, an echo of something just beneath the surface. Copper. The native Yavapai people had long known of the bright blue-green stones hidden in the rock. Later, Spanish explorers noted traces of the mineral while passing through. But it wasn't until the late 1800s, when American prospectors arrived, that the real digging began. And what they found wasn't just copper, it was copper that burned, a kind so rich and plentiful that it lit up furnaces across the country. Suddenly the quiet hillside wasn't so quiet anymore. The town that rose around it took the name Jerome, after Eugene Jerome, a New York investor who never set foot in Arizona, but whose money helped bankroll the first serious mining efforts. By 1890, Jerome had gone from a mining camp to a full-blown boomtown. Wooden buildings climbed the hillside. Mule-drawn carts clattered down the steep switchback streets. Miners emerged from underground covered in dust and flame-lit sweat. Copper was in everything now. Wiring, bullets, piping. The age of electricity was coming, and Jerome was holding one of its keys. The town grew, fast, crooked, and loud. By 1910, Jerome had 15,000 residents. That's about as many people as lived in all of Flagstaff at the time. It also had one opera house, 4 churches, over 20 boarding houses, and, depending on whom you asked, anywhere from 70 to 100 saloons. Alcohol flowed, cards flipped, fists flew, and that was just on a Tuesday. It earned a nickname, the wickedest town in the West, in part because it tried so very hard to be. Gambling dens ran all night, brothels perched above stores with names like House of Plenty and the Mile High. Shootouts happened often enough that townspeople learned to walk with a lean, just in case a bullet came rolling down the hill. Yet beneath all the noise, something real was happening. Families built homes, children attended school, a fire brigade was organised, a hospital was opened, which for its time was considered quite advanced. There was money, yes, but there was also pride. The miners worked dangerous, grueling shifts. The air underground was hot, damp and toxic. Cave-ins were not uncommon, but the pay was decent, and the copper, always the copper, kept coming. And then the earth shifted, literally. The very hill Jerome sat on began to slide. It wasn't a sudden collapse, more like a slow-motion shrug. Cracks opened in walls, a few buildings slid inches, then feet. Entire blocks were declared unstable. In 1931, the town jail, a full 2-story structure made of concrete, shifted so much it ended up 200 feet downhill, still perfectly upright. Locals just shrugged and kept using it, They were used to the ground moving by then. Fires, too, were common. Wooden structures burned to the ground and were replaced with brick. Landslides knocked out roads. Even gravity itself seemed to toy with the place, trying to erase it. But the miners rebuilt, again and again, until the copper slowed. The Great Depression hit. Demand dropped. New copper sources were discovered elsewhere, cheaper, easier to access. By the 1950s, Jerome's population had fallen below 100. Businesses closed, saloons went dry, the schoolhouse shuttered, houses were abandoned, their doors left open to the wind. Jerome was declared, officially, a ghost town, but not everyone left. Some stayed. Miners who had nowhere else to go. Widows. The stubborn, the sentimental. They sat on porches and watched the desert reclaim what it could. In time, nature moved in. Dust gathered on glass. Weeds sprouted between bricks. The paint peeled. Cats roamed the streets like they owned them, and they did. And then, in one of those strange American turns, came the artists. It was the 1960s and 70s, a time of reinvention, of looking backward and forward at once. Wanderers and creatives began to find their way to Jerome. They saw potential in the ruins, beauty in the broken windows, inspiration in the layered stories. Painters opened studios in old saloons. Sculptors moved into collapsing storefronts. A cooperative formed. The old hospital became a hotel again, this time with ghost tours included. Slowly, Jerome began to breathe again. Not with the frantic pace of a mining boom, but with something quieter. A second life. Tourists arrived, then returned. They bought pottery, listened to live music, asked questions about the jail at the bottom of the hill. Locals smiled, told stories, sometimes the same one twice. Today, Jerome's population hovers around 450. It's still built on a slope, still creaks when the wind rises, but it's no longer trying to collapse. It's trying to remember. There are artists here, yes, but also bakers, bartenders, history buffs, and ghosts, or so they say. People report strange lights, phantom footsteps, music in the hotel ballroom after midnight. Is it true? Maybe, but the real magic of Jerome is simpler. It's the fact that it's still there, that the town was never meant to last, but did. That something built for fire and noise could settle into a life of art and memory. That the walls cracked, but held. And that sometimes survival isn't about thriving. It's about holding your place on the cliff long enough to become something else. And finally, we head to sea. A journey with no return. A ship that left port with over 300 souls and disappeared into nothing. Our final story tonight is the haunting mystery of the USS Cyclops. The ocean doesn't need to roar to terrify you. It doesn't need to lift itself into towering waves or hurl lightning across the sky. Sometimes it just stays still, flat, calm, unbothered. And in that stillness, something or someone can simply vanish. This is the story of the USS Cyclops, a ship that left port in March of 1918, carrying 309 men and women, and was never seen again. No distress call, no wreckage, no survivors, no answers. Just a line on the map, then silence. Let's go back. It's World War I. The year is 1918. The United States is fully at war. Troop ships are crossing the Atlantic. Supplies are flowing east. German U-boats are lurking below the surface. The USS Cyclops is part of that effort, but not in the way most people imagine. She wasn't a battleship or a troop carrier, she was a collier. Her job? To carry coal, the black fuel that powered the Navy's fleet. But the Cyclops was no ordinary collier. She was the largest and fastest of her kind in the US Navy at the time, over 540 feet long, able to carry over 12,000 tons of coal, with a wide, heavy hull and reinforced ribs that made her one of the most formidable cargo vessels afloat. She was slow, yes, but dependable. Crews said she handled storms like a stubborn mule, grumbling but refusing to tip. And so, in March of 1918, she was tasked with something important. Manganese ore. Used to harden steel, manganese was in high demand for the war effort. Stronger steel meant better armour, better ships, better weapons. The Cyclops was loaded in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Along with the ore, she took on new crew members and a few passengers. Her final manifest listed 309 souls. On March 4th, she stopped briefly in Barbados to refuel. She reported no issues, no mechanical problems, no illness on board. Then she left. Her course, northeast, bound for Baltimore, Maryland. She was never seen again, and not one piece of her has ever been found. To this day, the disappearance of the USS Cyclops remains the single largest loss of life in US naval history not involving combat. So what happened? Well, that depends on who you ask. There are theories. Always. Let's start with the simplest. Theory 1. Structural failure. Some historians believe the Cyclops was overloaded. Manganese is heavier than coal, and if improperly loaded, or shifted during transit, it could have placed intense strain on the ship's spine, the keel. Add in a bit of rough weather and crack, down she goes. But here's the problem. No mayday call, no flares, no floating cargo, no oil slick, no lifeboats. Just nothing. Even in a fast sinking, something usually floats. Not this time. Theory 2, enemy action. It was wartime. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic. Perhaps the Cyclops was torpedoed. But post-war records from Germany show no evidence. No sub reported the kill. No captain claimed the strike. And again, no wreckage. Submarines don't erase ships. They tear them open. They leave trails. And the Cyclops left none. Theory 3. Sabotage. This theory centers around the ship's commander, Lieutenant Commander George Worley. Worley was an odd man. Born Johann Friedrich Wichmann in Germany, he immigrated to the US and changed his name. He worked his way up through the merchant marine and eventually took command of the Cyclops. Crew reports describe him as irritable, prone to long monologues, sometimes seen walking the deck in his underwear while shouting about insubordination. Some speculated he was sympathetic to the German cause, that he may have steered the ship into enemy hands, or scuttled her entirely. But again, no proof, no intercepts, no trace. Theory 4, the triangle. Ah yes, the Bermuda Triangle. The Cyclops' last known path took her straight through it, that vaguely defined patch of ocean between Miami, Bermuda and Puerto Rico, long associated with strange disappearances. Other ships, planes, entire squadrons. The sea is deep here, trench deep, sonar fades, pressure crushes. Did the Cyclops hit something unknown? A rogue wave? A vortex? Was it swallowed whole? Some say yes, others scoff. But mystery has a way of clinging to silence, especially when no answer ever comes. Then it happened again. In 1941, two of Cyclops' sister ships, the USS Proteus and the USS Nereus, also vanished, each on similar missions, each with heavy ore, and each in or near the same region. No distress signals, no wreckage, just more silence. Was it design flaw? A shared weakness in their construction? Maybe, but it feels pointed. Too similar, too complete. Whatever happened to the Cyclops, it was swift, total. Imagine it. A calm day, gentle swells, a horizon stretched smooth like glass. Then a moment, a snap, a tilt, a groan, steel bending, rivets popping. Then darkness, then nothing. Families waited weeks, then months. The Navy issued a statement. The Cyclops is overdue and must be presumed lost. There was no further explanation. One widow later said, "It was like my husband simply stepped out of the world." There is a kind of grief that has no shape. When there is no body to bury, no reason to assign, the mind circles back again and again to the same quiet question. Where did they go? Over a century later, we still don't know. The ocean does not keep secrets, it simply doesn't speak, and the Cyclops remains somewhere beneath, or nowhere at all, just a name on a plaque, a ship that left no trail, and a silence deeper than water